started. So thank you and welcome to today's webinar on maintaining change momentum can be a real challenge and what is your next move. I'm Greg Bull. I'm the presenter today, course facilitator today, and I'll be joined by a number of the Coxswain team who are on the line. And as always, we'd like this to be more of a conversation than just purely a talk fest. So feel free to enter comments in the chat box, and one of our team, Philip or Jonathan, will respond to those. So that would be really, really good. So thank you very much. Okay, so today we'll have a survey. The agenda today is what are the enemies of change momentum, spotting the warning signs of waning momentum before it happens, so you can in fact have mechanisms in place to ensure that you can maintain that momentum. So I'll get the survey up on screen. So what I'd like to get understanding in is, I think we've been through a period of change in the last several months, and what I'd like to understand is where people are at on the line with those changes and what you're feeling and thinking about that. So far so good, it's working well, and we should continue to do so. We're getting there, just keeping our heads above water, not sure what's next. We're taking small steps at a time, making slow but steady progress. We have a plan and we're heading in the right direction, or we've survived the initial storm. Things are going to keep changing, but we're up for it. So I'll just activate the survey now, and if you could enter your response into there, would be great. Simply choose one of those, and we get a sense of where we're at in terms of change. So far, so good. It's working well. Getting there, keeping heads above water. Excellent. It's a few more minutes. Let's get those selections into the choice. Would be good. We're getting there, keeping heads above water. So that seems like the most common one. Okay, we're halfway through. A few more entries would be great. Get those in, and we'll just see where people are at. Survive the initial storm. Things are going to keep us from changing. We're up for it. Okay, I'll end the voting in a minute. So if you get your selections in, it would be fantastic. Excellent. There are more coming in. That's really good. Okay, we're getting close to that. I'll end the voting now and share those. So as you'll see from the results, so far so good. It's working well. We should continue to do so. We're getting there. Just keeping heads up. We're not sure what's next, and we've survived the initial storm. And things are going to keep changing. We're up for it. So it's not bad. It's we've done some changes and things are going well. So what I'd like to talk about, what I'll focus on talking about today is what change means and how we maintain that momentum that we've got. Often after change, there's, especially after successful change, it's quite common for momentum to be lost. If you look at the quote from Benjamin E. Mays, a well-known civil rights leader, a founder of the civil rights movement in the one of the founders of the civil rights movement in the US, the tragedy of life is not in our failure, but rather in our complacency, not in our doing too much, but rather in our doing too little, not in our living above our ability, but rather in living below our capacities. The real enemies of change momentum are complacency, a sense of satisfaction or feeling that no action is required, or apathy, a lack of interest or curiosity, concern. And I think it's not always in the obvious. It's not obvious how complacent or apathetic we are. Sometimes we don't actually realise it. What's working now may not work in the future. We must remain on point. So the danger we face with all change as individuals and organisations is that we feel satisfied with where we've got to, and that we've overcome those initial challenges of those change, and things are going okay. And that often we drop our guard, and we can end up in a position where actually things do slip, and when we don't maintain that momentum. And I think with COVID-19, I think that's really the situation we're in now. A lot has changed. It's the tip of the iceberg. The world is going to continue to change moving forward. And what we do and how we prepare ourselves for that is going to be critical. And it's going to determine the success of us as individuals, because the world is very different for an individual perspective, but also for organisations as well, as how we perform and how we act with our customers and how we meet the challenges of our competition. We're really determined. It's the things we do and continue to do moving forward. Complacency comes in many forms, and often comes when we're flat out. And it's about not recognizing potential threats. And I think the reason I think it's not so much about complacency of action. There's often instances where people are busy doing things and we're doing a lot, but sometimes we're not necessarily doing the right things because it's really complacency of thought that undoes successful change. So it could be that we're satisfied with the actions we've taken and we're in a consolidation phase. However, because we're not scanning the environment well enough internally and externally, there could be other things we should be doing rather than consolidating, and vice versa. There's a lot of organisations their success has been by being agile and responsive and changing rapidly. But in fact, that could be a complacent strategy, in fact, that changing all the time could actually put them in a worse position, whereas consolidating might have been the best option. So it's, whilst those of you on the line might say, well, hang on, and maybe it's a reason why there are no people feel, oh, we don't need to attend this webinar, is that it's not the complacency of action, we're not doing things. It's the mental aspect about what we're thinking and feeling, believing. So apathy is a lack of interest or curiosity or concern. And I think this can manifest itself as really, in many instances, of having an overly internal focus. So we can often be thinking about our internal processes, our metrics and SLAs that really reinforce what we're doing internally, but they may not represent what the customer needs. But we're not open to that. We're very internally focused. We're apathetic to what's happening on the outside. Often ignoring changes in competitor or customer behaviour because they don't align with our view. And I'll talk to in a brief moment about some really high-profile examples where organisations haven't been tuned into what's happening in the market, and their thought and actions have been lazy. They haven't been lazy in what they're doing. It's just that they've missed what's been happening in the marketplace, and it's cost them dearly. The other one is where things do change, where there is variance in things that are happening, and we don't act on that, and we don't change what we're doing. We ignore variance. We are apathetic to change. We don't take action when we should, and that can result in poor consequences down the track. So there are many high-profile examples of corporate complacency and apathy, and these names would be familiar to most of us on the line, I would imagine. We look at Blockbuster Video and Netflix and video streaming, and the sticking to the bricks and mortar model. I don't know if many of you have watched the Steve Jobs launch of the iPhone, but he very clearly in that, when he talks about particularly the touch screen on the iPhone, is to how keyboards on the phones, how using a stylus were not what customers wanted, and the competitive advantage that Apple had was the flexibility of the touchscreen, and what it was essentially your keyboard could be anything or your apps could be anything that you designed them to be. These organisations didn't respond and recognise to that, and they believed their model was the better one, and then they failed. And Kodak's another great example of how they failed. They were complacent in thought in terms of their belief that film and film processing would continue. They weren't actually, they didn't do nothing. They tried very hard, Kodak. They at one point in time, they were selling more digital cameras than anybody else. They just failed to recognise that what they were doing was in a declining market. Whereas Fujifilm, on the other hand, looked at their strengths. They went to their R&D department and looked at what they were capable of doing. They looked at their technologies, and they looked at their chemical business, and they diversified outside of film processing into things like LED screens and into cosmetics through their chemicals business. And Fuji actually thrived with the demise of film processing, but Kodak did not, because it was the apathy and complacency of thought, not necessarily the action that these organisations took, that resulted in their demise. On the weekend, I wasn't planning on talking about this, but I watched the movie The Founder, and I don't know if many of you online have watched it, but it's about the story of McDonald's, how Ray Kroc discovered McDonald's 50 cents hamburgers and then turned that into the multinational corporation that we know and love about McDonald's today. And some of us online might love McDonald's more than others. But what I found really, really interesting in this was that the McDonald's brothers were incredibly hardworking, incredibly smart and successful. What they created in the Speedy system
was a unique way and a unique way of selling hamburgers, and they minimised their menu. They created almost like a production line process, which is essentially the founding principle behind McDonald's, and they were very successful, and that's what Ray Kroc saw. The complacency piece for the McDonald's brothers was they were very internally focused and they couldn't see beyond their own store. Whereas Ray was able to take that concept and turn it into McDonald's as a global corporation. So ultimately, the McDonald brothers failed because they couldn't see beyond their blinkered view of the world. They were complacent in thought and apathetic in their decision making. Whereas Ray learned often by mistake through trial and error, but he was constantly looking to change. And I think the quote here, "Nothing recedes like success. Don't let it happen to you," says you need to be constantly scanning the environment and looking to improve and try new things. Otherwise, we will go backwards. And I think that's the important thing about this webinar is maintaining change momentum is about putting in place change and then being tuned into what's happening around you and with your internally and externally with your people, so that change can continue to grow and become a success. So the trick to this is about stopping apathy and complacency happening before it occurs. So it's knowing what your next move is going to be and making an informed decision. So it's knowing and looking for the indicators and symptoms of complacency and having mechanisms in place to prevent that from happening. So the symptoms could be, there's, when you read this list here, there's probably not a feeling that you haven't felt at some stage, whether it's through your own personal development, whether it's through the development of your team, or even thinking about the organisation within which you're working for. A sense of satisfaction we've spoken about, especially success-driven satisfaction, that resting on your laurels, that everything's working, everything's fine, we'll continue as we are. You find the second one a lot in teams. We're doing all we can. Is people can't see beyond their current paradigm. We're a successful team. We're a high-performing team. We're doing everything we can. They're not seeing that there are other ways, there are better ways to do things. So if people are saying we're doing all we can, you go, oh, it's an alarm bell. Okay, maybe we're getting a bit complacent here, or maybe being a little apathetic in our thinking. Comfort with current performance, very similar again. We're happy with our current performance, it's pretty good. We work with a lot of organisations where we're comfortable with their current performance. They don't necessarily understand why things aren't going as well as they can. But when you dig a little deeper, you recognise and realise that there are opportunities within the way they do things that they don't see, because as an external coming in and looking at someone else's business and processes, you are able to form insights that maybe aren't always obvious when you're there, when you've got that blinkered focus. Another thing we see a lot happening is in these accompanying behaviours, is when you're trying to encourage your people, your team, your organisation, even yourself, that you can prove, and there's this pushback, there's this belief that we can't, that greater performance isn't possible, it's not necessarily achievable, we can't do that. It's not believing the possibility to improve. We spoke about protecting the current status. We said a lot about the McDonald brothers. They were very happy with the current status. They wanted things to remain as they were. They were very happy and comfortable with what they were doing. They didn't see that ultimately they would be overrun by a bigger, better version of what they've created. And not looking to innovate. I think this is an interesting one. There's a lot of change resistance around doing things differently. Innovation isn't about creating brand new things. Innovation is really about the iterative, gradual improvement. It's on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month basis, and saying, how do we get better? Where can we find the little bits and pieces more that we can improve? And if you haven't got that sort of continuous improvement mindset, that desire to innovate and be better, then you will ultimately slip backwards, because the world doesn't stand still. So these are the sort of symptoms and behaviours. If you're seeing those within your teams, with your organisation, or even with your own thinking, if there's a sense there that, okay, there is some complacency creeping in, what can I do about it? I think making the right move is knowing about the source of complacency and understanding where they're coming from. And there are internal and external forces at play, and being able to scan what's happening internally and externally, and then thinking about those in that way will lead you to say, okay, my next move needs to be this, because my scan of my internal operations and thinking and my external says that there are things changing here. I need to respond to those. I can consolidate here, but I need to take action here. And these fall into, I guess, 6 broad groups: people and culture, process and systems being your internal considerations, and then what your customers and competition, those external things, are happening in the marketplace. People's needs evolve as your organisation changes. So often we see, and you would have seen this yourselves, is that organisations make changes in systems and processes, but though not necessarily we're not always tuned into what's happening with our people. So are our skills and capabilities keeping pace? Particularly now at COVID, there's been a real transition in the way we work and the way customers are doing things. That's going to change the skills and capability set that people have. Not just for your team, but also for ourselves. We need to be thinking as individuals and us as a small business, what skills and capabilities do we need to add to what we do, because the market, the world is changing. Once you have made those decisions, how are we supporting our people, and what coaching mechanisms do we have in place to ensure that our people can move along and keep pace with change? Management and leadership practices and styles of the past, are they right? Do they fit? Do we need to do things differently because we're in a different world? Particularly if you think about remote working. The way, and there's some interesting data out there at the moment which shows that there are, I guess, things that are, collaboration is seen to be struggling in terms of, since the move to remote working, but also leaders and managers are finding themselves less effective. And so there's this whole paradigm shift around. We were very used to having people at close quarters and being able to collaborate and manage and lead, and my style was to do it this way. People are finding now that the capability set to do things differently in a remote place is very different. Now, how as an organisation do we help people get better at managing remote teams and managing and collaborating as people together to get those outcomes we're used to in a remote way? And that's a change that needs to take place. Are our systems and connectedness helping with that? I think one of the real issues here is that there's often this thought that because some people get it, now I've got some people, the others will get it by osmosis, if you like. And I think it's, don't assume that your people are equipped to meet the change, to meet the challenge. You need to help people get there. It will take a long time for some people to get there. You need to help them. If you assume that things will happen, they may not happen, or they definitely won't happen as quickly as you need to keep pace with change. So think about your people and what actions you need to take to help them get there. Don't assume they're going to get there by themselves. The cultural thing is a really important one. We often see that particularly people change. Change isn't just about changing process and structure. Often there's a cultural and mindset change that has to come with it. And I think a really good example of this is organisations that move to, say, an agile philosophy. People have been very used to the traditional way of working. We move to agile, and we put in place a lot of the ceremonies and things that come with agile. But we haven't addressed necessarily the mindset piece that comes with working in an agile way, that iterative, innovative, test, measure, learn, short run way of thinking. People are still very much used to the old style. And so what you get is you get this kind of really cumbersome hybrid of, we've got an agile way of working in ceremonies, but we've got a traditional mindset, and the two don't really work well together. So there's that cultural piece needs to work. So as your change embeds, whether it's a COVID-related change or other change, think about what's our cultural mindset focus. Are we very internal and procedural, and are we external or customer focused? And have we got the balance right? Is our focus right to get to where we're trying to get to? What's our decision making like? We did a webinar a number of weeks ago about decision making, and so as things change, your decision making processes will need to change also. In this rapidly changing world, we might need to be more risk enabling, and whereas in the past it might have been risk averse. Are we trying to react and respond and be agile, but we have a very risk averse decision making set, and we're not risk enabling in the way our thought process? Once again, our decision making culture hasn't kept pace with the changes that we've put in place. Are we challenging the status quo, or are we overconfident or too accepting of the current status? And I think particularly now is our ability to challenge and question in a constructive way is really important, and creating a culture that lets people say, hang on, this isn't working, or I don't think this is going to work for these reasons, and presenting a valid argument, having a valid conversation is really important. And often change decisions get stuck in this sort of bias that we've made a decision, we're going to stick to it, and we don't create a culture where challenging that and accepting that we're going to have to, yes, this is directionally where we want to go, but we need to move and change iteratively, because we need to see, is this working, yes or no? Do we need to stick the course correct, or change direction completely? And so creating that culture is important. And if you change the structure and the process without changing the mindset and the culture, you'll find that, once again, your changes will lose momentum because you have this mismatch of culture and structure and process. Your customers and competition are changing as well as your organisation. So what's happening in your organisation is happening in other organisations. Whether you're an individual, there are individuals out there. So if you're looking to advance your career or capabilities or whatever, there are other people out there doing the same. Whether your team is responding well to customer needs, or what's happening in the marketplace, and strategically and operationally is what's happening in the marketplace. So it's important that we are looking and scanning the environment. And there's two ways. There's the strategic piece here. Is what we're doing directionally right and moving our business forward? And then there's the operational piece. Is what we're doing meeting the needs of our customers and keeping us in front of our competition? And so scanning the environment and understanding what's happening to your customers. Are we getting more or less complaints? Volumes dropping off? Are we getting more or less sales? What are the customers doing? How does that impact us? Are we looking on the outside? How are we responding to those external changes? Are we getting the right data and information to form insights, to be able to synthesize those into action? So this is what's happening in the market. We've noticed a change in the way customers are doing things. How set up are we now to respond to that and do things differently, to change the way we do things to meet that? So once again, it's, yes, we put a change in place. There's been an action and reaction. How adept are we at then responding to that and making something happen? I think a really interesting one also is data and information. With any change, there's a shift in what's happening in the market, what's happening in your organisation. So, have we made a change and we're doing things differently, but we're still relying on the old data, the old information sets? And so there's a piece here to say, is this data still relevant and valid for the decisions that we're making? And if not, then the historical trends, conventions, and rules of thumb we used to use may not be valid anymore. So you need to create new ones. Now, because in a shorter space of time, these new data sources aren't going to necessarily be as complete as the previous ones. So we need to be able to operate with imperfect data. So once again, another form of that can limit change momentum is the data you're using to make those informed decisions is no longer relevant. You've been complacent or apathetic about changing the information and data you've got. You've assumed that what worked in the past would work now, and it's giving you insights, or it's not giving you insights that will enable you to make the required alterations or feedback, if you like, in terms of what's happening. And I think the important thing is that whole, how are we going? What's that feedback, and then what's it telling us? And if your data information sources aren't relevant for the changes that have taken place, then clearly your momentum or the decision or the next move you're going to make isn't necessarily going to be the right move. So how do we avoid the drivers of complacency and apathy and make an informed next move? I think the first one here is around about lack of discipline and consequence management. If these things, if you don't have accountability, people like to be held accountable. They need to be held accountable to their actions and their performance. So in any change, when any change is made, it's holding people accountable to the decisions we made and the behaviours and practices that we put in place as part of that change. So if you don't have the discipline and then the consequence management, that is acting when things aren't right, then you will lose momentum. So your next decision could be, okay, we need to put in place a better way of managing and ensuring that we do this. I think lack of recognition is really important, particularly around change. I think recognising, I guess there's two things here. One is, yes, our performance and how well we're going, but also recognition that people have changed and that we're doing things as intended. And so people, as much as people like to be held to account, they also like to be recognised for what they're doing and those achievements that they've made. It may just be the fact that we're doing things differently and you've adapted to that. It's working well done. It's just a matter of recognising the changes happen and the reforms put in place. If you don't do that, your change will lose momentum. So once again, scan your internal environment. How good are we at recognising what we've done and how we've changed it and giving people a pat on the back for that and the performance we're getting? And if you're not doing it, your next move could be, okay, we need to provide some recognition and thought around this because people, yes, lots happened, but we're not providing recognition that we need to. This is an interesting one. Often following change, you'll get your early adopters, you'll get some people that will gradually get on the bus, and you might get some resistors. And so a really important part of ensuring that change is successful is that we do not walk past where things haven't changed or things have reverted back to what they used to be. It's the behaviour or practices or actions that you walk past are the things that you endorse. And so it's important to remember that if we've changed from this to this and people still doing the old way, then there needs to be a way of doing that. I work with an organisation where I think 5 years hence or prior, they had changed from a management operating system to another management operating system, and they'd been running them in parallel. And the plan had been to run these two systems in parallel for 3 to 6 months to transition across. 5 years later, there were still 30–40% were still using the old system because they had tolerated people still working in the old system and hadn't shut the old system down. And so what had happened then, there was a diversion of the way things were done, and people had accepted that, yes, we now work in two systems. And procedures and policies were being written for two systems at the same time, when the original strategic intent was shut system 2 down and just work in system 1. Instead, we went from working and supporting two systems when the whole plan had been to one. So there's an example there of is that acceptance of old work habits. There has to be a cutoff point as to when you stop. As with any change, and I spoke to a client, a company a few weeks ago, and they said they weren't very good at monitoring the progress or results in terms of the change process put in place. We've done a lot of change, but we do not know how it's going, and we don't know. We think it's working, it appears to be working, but we don't know. It's really important to monitor progress and results in a timely way and very quickly, particularly with any change initiative. As we've spoken about before, I think about 1/3 of all projects actually meet their expectations, which means 2/3 are either neutral or below performance. So a lot of that is because organisations put in place a change, things don't go as planned, yet rather than monitoring that frequently and regularly and making minor change or adjustments to get us back on track to meet the expectations we had put in place, they let that slip. They're complacent about that. They've put a change in place. There's an assumption it's just going to work. It's really important to monitor progress and results and performance. Are they as expected? And if not, understand their variance as to why. But not just a variance. If they're better than expected, why? Okay, well, can we do more of that? Or if things haven't changed, once again, the things are as expected. Are they as expected because we're doing what we thought, or is it just through fortune or luck or whatever? So analysing that variance and monitoring performance is really key. If you don't do that after any change, or even in the course of BAU as well, performance will slip. Lack of follow-up or follow-through. I guess we spoke about this a little bit before. This is it's about being present. It's about talking to people about what's happening
recognising that things are going on and being able to talk to them. You might have a high-performing team, a very capable team, but just the fact that showing that you're present, that you care about what's happening and that the changes and things are working is really, really important. Organisations that don't do that, that aren't good at that, will find that they will have a drop-off in momentum. There's nothing better to improve momentum than to reinforce and stoke the fire and push things along. So remember, part of your next action will be we need to follow through and make sure that things are working as well as they are. If they've slipped a bit, then if there's variance, what actions do we need to take? Insufficient coaching support to help people adapt to change. I think this is probably a big part of most. A lot of changes don't get to where they get you. There's this assumption that people will eventually get it. That a number of people in the organisation, number of people in the team are achieving their objectives, and others will just get it as well. That's not the way that it works. But as I said before, following up and follow through, and then providing where required the coaching support to help people adapt to changes is critically important. The momentum of your change initiative is really about the faster you can get people to be comfortable with the change and adapt to the change, the better. So that effort in coaching, supporting, and helping people get there is really important. And it could be that as an organisation, you don't necessarily have the capacity or capability to do that. It wasn't part of the original change plan that we would need extra coaching support to help, or we need to do more analysis and monitoring of what we're doing. I would say then find that capacity, find that help, because any change initiative, it's critical how you start sets how you're going to finish, and momentum is driven by building up momentum and maintaining it. So have a look at how you're going, and if things aren't working as well as they can, the investment in extra capacity and capability to do that is potentially really, really important and can save you or make you a lot of extra money. Failing to look for further improvement opportunities. This is a big one. We make a change and then we don't have that iterative, okay, this is working, how can we make it work better? That mindset and thought process is such that it doesn't work. Or alternatively, there's another form to this, is that we have too many opportunities to look at, and we don't necessarily choose the right ones. We're not scanning the market, we're not scanning our internal and external environment, and we don't know of those improvement opportunities which are the best ones to follow. And so having improvement opportunities is one thing, is then selecting which ones will iteratively get us there is important. And that's where that data and analysis and scanning the market becomes all too important. So in summary, to wrap up, to make the right move, don't assume what's working will continue. So it's about evaluating and understanding your position and making informed decisions. So whether it's COVID-19 or any change, the change you make is just the start. It's then what you do next. Your next move is the critical one. If it has been a successful change, then don't be satisfied with that, because potentially things drop off. There's usually always a honeymoon period to any change, and it's important to understand what's driving that and to ensure that we don't get complacent and apathetic in our thinking and actions. To do that, you need to look at internal and external factors. We spoke about people and culture. So how are our people going, and what is our cultural mindset? Are they matched to the changes that we've put in place? What things we need to do that? We spoke about processes and structure and those sorts of things. So are our processes in place to improve as they are? Do we need to consolidate? So things are going well, we're well placed, our decisions have been good so far. We need to make sure we consolidate and build a foundation, getting ready for the next wave. Or have things slipped or changed? Are we doing better than we expected? Or are we doing maybe not as well as expected? What adjustments and tweaks do we need to make? So we need to think about, once again, is what are the things in terms of our environment that we can tweak and change that will continue and help maintain that momentum? Are we looking at the data, and is our data set right? Are we looking at variance?
Have people reverted back to old ways of doing things? Have we given enough recognition for what we've done so far? Think about a lot of those internal things that you're doing. Has the customer or competition responded differently to what we expected, and therefore the customer service stuff that we put in place needs to change as a result of that? Or do we need to make a complete change of direction altogether? This just isn't working. What else do we need to do? What of the decision points we have, where do we need to go next? The critical thing here is to make that right move, make an informed decision. And this is about getting your performance data on a regular basis, looking at the variance, whether it's positive, negative, or whether things are neutral, and understanding the things we've put in place, why are they working well or why are they working poorly, and what do we need to do more of? If they're working well, what can we do better? It's working well at the moment. How do we continually improve? How do we build on that to get better and better? How do we get some runs on the board to build on top of that? Now, is the data information we've got the right data, and are we able to make right decisions? Above all, though, it's about discipline. With any change it's put in place, it's getting that operating rhythm going, getting that feedback loop happening, and making really, really good decisions about what's the next move. Coxswain Alliance is we help organisations navigate change. Change is a big part of what we do, and helping organisations get there. And so the question I've got to the group is we've been through a lot of change in the past few months, and there's a lot of initiatives that I'm speaking to people all the time in different industries that people are working on and doing. And at this time, and with the complexities we have in the operations that we have in working, there is a need for some additional capacity and capability to help with that. And so at Coxswain Alliance, we are more than happy to have a conversation with you or people within your organisation to talk about how those change initiatives are going and what are some of the things that you might need some help with. These could be very simple things like looking at your data and your data sets and your dashboards. It could be we have a lot of manual processes and we need to automate those. Our initiative is such that we've created these things, we now need to automate them. Can you help us with that? It could be about improving your processes and things because things have shifted and changed. We therefore need to shift and change with that. So think about who you know at Coxswain Alliance. If there's something you'd like to talk about, please feel free to reach out and contact us. You can contact us via the email or on our website. I see that where there's been a bit of chat happening on the chat box. Are there any other questions whilst we've got a few minutes up our sleeve that or any comments that you'd like to add before we head off? Thank you for the trivia question, Phil. I didn't actually know that the first digital camera was Kodak until I did some research for this, but thank you for filling us in on that. Yeah, I think you're right, Jonathan. Yeah, change is hard, and those being wedded to decisions of the past is a challenge. We make a lot of people can be quite dogmatic about I've decided to do this and that's the way forward. We need to be constantly scanning the environment and looking and understanding those internal and external drivers. Are they supporting the change you put in place? I think the important thing to remember is that about a third of all change and transformation projects actually meet their objectives, which means that 2/3 either remain neutral, which means no change was achieved at all, or actually are worse off. And therefore, I think that belief that every decision we make has to be right every decision you make is going to be one of three things. It can either be yes, it was a correct decision, well done. What do we need to keep doing to make sure we maintain that momentum? Or two, it's not doing as well as we thought. What do we need to do to directionally? It might have been right. Was it the way we executed, or was it strategically or directionally the wrong decision? It's having those thought processes, and I think expecting a change will somehow by osmosis or luck get to its end goal without that additional effort in maintaining momentum is where a lot of organisations go wrong. And I think a lot of it is driven by the things we've spoken about today. It's from the very outset of the change, do we have the discipline in place to look at what we're doing internally, externally, and putting in place those mechanisms to make sure we aren't complacent with what's happening. Make sure we're not apathetic about, ignoring some obvious signs that are happening in the marketplace. Okay, there don't appear to be many questions coming through. So those of you on the line, thank you for your attendance. Thank you for the chat and questions that you put in place. Thank you, Brittany. That was great. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you for joining us. I look forward. Our next webinar will be in a few weeks' time. In the meantime, we will send out slides and also a recording of this webinar. If you've watched this webinar and you believe there are people in your organisation that might benefit, please forward on the link to watch the recording. That would be great, and then you can use the slides to support that as well. So thank you very much. Thank you again for joining us. I hope the topic was useful.